Okay, so this is our first video in the series on AUC section 220, and it's regarding quality control for an engagement conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. And it comes from SAS numbers 122 and 128, and is effective for auditing periods ending on or after December 15, 2012. So here, as in all AUC sections, we begin with an introduction and kind of a scope of what this particular section is going to be about, and any background information that might be helpful to us in understanding this section. So let's start here at the beginning, AUC section 220.01. We see that this section is going to address the responsibilities of the auditor regarding quality control procedures and the audit of financial statements. So just like a manufacturer may have quality control procedures to make sure their product doesn't come out with any defects, we also want to have quality control procedures for an audit to make sure that our work is good. So not only does it address our quality control procedures, but also the responsibility of the quality control reviewer. And that's a third-party person outside of the engagement team who will review our engagement for us to ensure that it complied with professional standards and our policies. And the section also applies as necessary to other engagements that aren't necessarily an audit of financial statements. For instance, section 930 that talks about interim financial information. And so the section should be read in conjunction with AICPA Code of Professional Conduct and also QC section 210, which we'll see shortly. So we see here that these quality control policies are the responsibility of the audit firm. So not really a particular team member or a client. These are the responsibility of the firm as a whole to make sure that the audits are done properly. And so that means that these quality control policies should provide us reasonable assurance that the firm and its personnel complied with professional standards, applicable legal and regulatory requirements, and also these quality control standards should provide reasonable assurance that reports issued by the firm are appropriate in the circumstances. And so QC section 210 is called a firm system of quality control, and this is written and implemented by the ASB, the Auditing Standards Board, under the Statements on Quality Control Standards. So let's go to this particular section. Let's take a look at that. The section goes into very deep detail on quality control, so for purposes of this video, we're just going to take a high-level look at it so that maybe we can have another video later that goes through it in detail. And so what we'll do is we'll go to a web browser, and we will type in this IP address here. You can pause the video to write it down or whatnot, but we'll come to the screen where we have all the statements on quality control standards, and we see these are issued by the ASB. And they only have one standard, and this is a QC section 10, so we can click on QC section 210, and it brings us to a document just like what we've been looking at in the AUC sections, only this will be discussing quality control procedures. So let's click on that now. So here we have QC section 210. See, it looks a lot like the AUC sections that we've been going through. And they've got some introductory material, some objectives, some definitions, and the requirements. See, our objectives are the same as what we saw in the AUC section that we were looking at because they've pulled that directly from here. So let's get a high-level understanding of quality control policies as relevant to this particular section. We see that this lays out the elements of a system of quality control. So they boil it down to 6 areas, and that's the leadership responsibilities for quality within the firm. For instance, the tone at the top, relevant ethical requirements, acceptance and continuance of client relationships, human resources, engagement performance, and monitoring. So if we scroll through here, we would see that they discuss each of these topics in detail and give some suggestions on policies that can be implemented at the firm to allow you to meet those different areas and set forth good policies. And then just like the AUC sections, they have other explanatory material where you can get some more color on the particular rules. So now that we kind of understand where we can go for more specific detailed information about quality control policies, let's go back to AUC section 220 and continue our high-level overview about what that section is going to be about. Okay, so now we're back in AUC section 220 where we had left off. So up to this point, we've been discussing that the firm has to implement quality control policies, but this number 4 tells us that the engagement team has the responsibility to implement those quality control procedures. So after the firm has developed and implemented these quality control procedures, it's the responsibility of the engagement team to actually use them. And in the context of the audit, the engagement team is entitled to rely on the firm's system of quality control when it is performing some of the procedures in the other AUC sections. For instance, the explanatory material, paragraph A2, provides some instances where we could rely on quality controls in an effort to comply with other AUC sections. So let's go down to there. Okay, so now we're down in the explanatory material, and this gives us a couple of instances where we could rely on the firm's system of quality control and gaining compliance with different sections related to these. So a lot of these relate to AUC section 210 and 200. For instance, those sections require us to have personnel that are competent and to exercise engagement with independence and to employ acceptance and continuous systems to ensure that we are getting the clients and engagements that are appropriate for our firm, and also complying with legal and regulatory requirements. So all these things are required for us in other AUC sections, but what this is telling us is that we can implement quality control policies at the firm level to ensure that we comply with all of these items, and this can be relied on for each engagement, rather than in each engagement going through each of these steps. We could have an overall firm policy process to ensure that these things are in line with the standards. So let's go back up to the scope section and continue our discussion here. Okay, to finish off the introductory section, we have here that explains that a lot of the requirements here in AUC section 220 will be directed at the engagement partner, but this item tells us that whenever that's the case, the engagement partner can delegate those tasks to the engagement team or other personnel within the firm. But on the flip side, it tells us that even though a lot of these requirements are directed at the engagement partner, that doesn't relieve the engagement team of their responsibilities. So let's go down and reiterate the objectives of this AUC section 220. We see that the objective is to implement quality control procedures at the engagement level that provide the auditor with reasonable assurance that the audit complies with professional standards and applicable legal and regulatory requirements, and that the auditor's report issued is appropriate in the circumstances. And so remember, this is exactly word for word from the QC section 10 that we just looked at, and that's because a lot of these policies are going to be coming from that section. But in the subsequent videos, we are going to be discussing the requirements of AUC section 220 as it relates to quality control procedures.